Oh, good morning.
Oh, good morning.
Or perhaps it's afternoon or evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. I'd like to welcome you to today's Journyx Project Execute webinar. Our webinar title today is Overcoming the Obstacles of Resource Management Across Cultures and Borders. We have as our special guest today Bob Esplampour, who's actually based over in France. Bob's going to be joining us from his office over in France today and presenting us with the topic. He has lots of experience in managing people and projects across borders and multi-geographical scenarios. So I'll let Bob do a better job of introducing himself, giving a little background. My name is James Bronner. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Journyx. It's certainly my pleasure to be your host for today's webinar. Our goal is to keep this right at an hour. So what we'll do is we'll spend about 40 minutes or so in the presentation, probably 45, and then we'll leave 5 or 10 minutes at the end for some Q&A. Bob normally does these presentations in a more interactive setting, so he would encourage your participation. The way to do that electronically is to click on the Questions tab using the GoToWebinar control panel. Type in your question that you have for Bob anytime during the presentation. If it makes sense for me to interject, I will do so. Otherwise, I'll collect those and we'll present those to Bob at the conclusion today. Also, as a live webinar attendee, you can receive a full PDU for attendance at today's webinar. And your natural question would be, what process do I need to go through to receive that? And the answer is you don't really have to do anything at all. What we'll do is we'll send out a follow-up email, normally within 24 hours after the conclusion of the webinar, and it'll include a link to the slides as well as a link to a PDF file that has the PDU certificate for you to submit to PMI for your certification. So our agenda today is quite straightforward. First, Bob Esplampour from MYP Consulting over in France is going to take us through the webinar today, and then we'll begin responding to your submitted questions. So without further ado, let me go ahead and hand over the reins to Bob.
Hello, hi everybody. This is Bob. I'm on this webinar from Paris. I hope everybody's well wherever you are. MYP Consulting stands for Manager Projects. Basically, my background goes, well, I have about 20 plus years of change management work experience, mainly in project management and resource management. So this is kind of like a summary of a lot of experience of hands-on implementations across Europe, touching more than, I guess, around 8 or 9 different countries in Europe. So cultural diversity, multi-site development activity, everything you can imagine has actually been the experience that's generated some of the information I will be presenting. One of the reasons why I thought about this topic was because I happen to be quite surprised when I look at different companies these days. And actually the lack of the level of maturity in resource management is quite astonishing. Yet resource management is not really rocket science. What really is complicating resource management is it's because it's very operational. And because it is very operational, it's very much linked to the way people work, linked to personalities and cultures and organizations. And these are the topics that I will be discussing. These are really the real obstacles of implementing resource management. And as you will conclude, it's not really so simple, and that explains why the level of maturity in resource management is so low in many organizations. If it was simple, everybody would be doing it, right? Okay, so let's go at look at the topics we will be covering in this webinar. We have about 40 minutes, so I will go quite quickly. If you have any points you want to interject, please do via the software, and James will interrupt if needed. Basically, in this interactive presentation, interactive because you always have a possibility to interject with writing your comments, I will be presenting to you some hidden obstacles in making resource management work. Obstacles that are involving organizational differences, differences in operating processes, differences in IT infrastructure, planning and staffing techniques, cultural differences, obviously that's one of the key topics, impacting access to information, planning, notion of risk, and staffing. We will also look at legal, social, and human resource management considerations, and last but not least, we will look at leadership differences, which is also a very important element in resource management. Because it needs some transparency, and I guess the leadership vision could be either very for or against the level of the transparency that generates resource management. So let's go on. So as a vehicle to transmit this information, which comes purely from my experience, I have created, in a way, a fictive case where you should put yourself into a position that you have just been assigned to lead a strategic project to implement resource management across your organization. Before you accept this mission, should you have a choice, which sometimes you don't, you will have to ask, or you will ask, sometime you will ask 2 weeks or a month to better understand just, you know, what are the implications of the project in terms of scope, and you will try to do some high-level planning in order to identify the major obstacles. So in a way, this is like a high-level risk assessment before you take the position, should you have the choice. So basically, that's kind of like the contextual framework for the rest of the presentation. Before we get on with the rest of the presentation, I'd like to ask James to collect your experience level in resource management. James?
Sure, Bob. Let's go ahead and launch a poll. I want to ask how many of you have actually dealt with resource management issues in the past. Just simply select yes or no, and we'll go from there. We're going to guess that we know the response to this question, don't we, Bob?
Yeah. Well, we did have a very high percentage in the last batch. I think it was quite a high percentage, higher than the one before.
Well, no big surprises. It looks like 100% of our attendees today, Bob, are dealing with or have dealt with resource management issues.
Wow, that's excellent. Actually, that's great because I think the value you get out of this exchange goes up with the level of experience you've had with this subject. So great, that's fantastic. It's the highest we've had. So last time, I think it was around 60%. Now let's look at basically next. Okay, so you've accepted the challenge. You've accepted this new mission that your management has given you, and you now will use your experience, your know-how to do a quick assessment. So more than likely, you will tailor a project plan based on some initial questions. Some of these initial questions will be like, well, you know, the basic stuff, organizational impact. How many resources are there to be covered? How many sites will be covered? Obviously, that complicates when you have a lot of different sites and different backgrounds. Where will the resources be based? Which project categories will they be touching? What is the status of the current IT infrastructure, and so on, and you know, you will ask some really good questions, which are legitimate. Management support, who owns the resources to be managed? Who is the sponsor of the project, or who are the sponsors of the project? linkages, process linkages, and so on. So basically, these are some questions you will ask. These are some classical questions that I think most of you will be able to put together in your 2 weeks assessment. But I think there are some more issues that are more hidden, and I think the next slide, the rest of the presentation, will go deeper and go further to some hidden factors that not everybody will be able to identify just off the bat. And this is why it confirms the level we are in maturity level in most companies on resource management. So to kind of like structure this work, I have just identified 4 main considerations. So 4 main areas we're going to touch upon: the scope factor, the maturity factor, status of current resource management practices, the organizational complexity factor, and 4th, the cultural differences factor. There's a 5th factor, or maybe there's even a 6th if you're imaginative, and I'm sure, but at least there's a 5th factor, which is financial. And but we're not going to touch on that one. So those are the 4 main factors or considerations I'll be presenting. So let's start with the first one. First one, on the scope side, you obviously want to look at the what is the perimeter or the scope in terms of different functions. Now, what do we mean by that? Okay, on one side of the spectrum, you have a monofunction example where you would have like an implementation for an IT department, like an IT global services for a large multinational company. Very, very common. On the other side of the spectrum, you will have a mixed function example where you would have multinational doing engineering services, procurement, they'd be doing construction, they will be doing facilities management. I imagine. So those are different functions that obviously have specific needs. They intervene probably simultaneously or in parallel or sequentially, but you need to be able to manage this scope at a multifunctional level. Now, imagine I'm going to ask you, which one is more complicated? Is it the monofunction or the multifunction? I guess you've all done resource management before. It's obviously the multifunction. And also the question of the business processes that are covered. You would have examples like different business processes. Classical one would be development, product development. You could have customer service, more downstream work, and you could also have production and processes like production services, or you could have product management, which would be kind of like life cycle management. Once you've got the products out, you might need to manage the product life cycle. So these different business processes have different staffing, resource management requirements. So that also complexity is another driver of complexity, obviously. Next, how many sites are involved? Quite important. Where they're located is very important because there are local particularities. And obviously, what is the history of each site? Be aware of sites that are conversions. For example, in some industries, they have this possibility to buy competitor sites, or even they buy acquisition. They have inorganic growth, so they've bought different businesses, and in a way, the company is a mosaic of different businesses. But once you start actually looking at resource management across those sites, you find that, whoa, wait a minute, these sites really have a highly heterogeneous way of working. They have different company culture, they have different notion of service and risk, so it's quite complex once you have historical backgrounds that are different. Next, obviously, is English. Language is a critical one, very obvious, but the business language, where you have to fight with multi-language cases, where some sites don't really use English, which would be very complex. What site level resource pools need to be covered? What is the global size of the resource pool is important. Now, on the next item, have roles and responsibilities been harmonized? Critical, very, very critical. We often find that it's not the case, where roles and responsibilities have not been harmonized across sites, although there could be appellations that are the same, but each local site might have a different understanding of roles and responsibilities, even if the name is the same of the function. So if they have harmonized the functional appellation, you need to go next level deeper and look at what's underneath the cover, what's underneath the hood in a way, and try to reach and see and what you in most cases find that you will have different job descriptions underneath, even if the appellation of the functions are the same. That means what? That means that all of a sudden your project has to indoctrinate the HR department and get HR involved, because it looks like your simple resource management project needs to now also work on harmonization of roles and responsibilities, which is a huge scope increase. Very important. I actually had that happen to me once. Last item on the slide, how many potential resource managers are there? From my experience, each resource manager adds another degree of complexity in your project. So because why? Because resource managers are like internal customers. Each one wants to manage his troops differently. They all want to do it their way because it's kind of like a personal identity issue. So up to today, I have actually found very few companies that have standardized the way of working for resource managers. So each resource manager basically is there because they're entitled to go up the ladder, become a resource manager, but yet there's no real common way of working across the board. That's also a very critical element. Next, let's go to the second factor of difficulty. What is the status of current resource management practices? This is a critical one where you need to assess very quickly the maturity level of existing tools and processes, the way people are working with these tools and processes. For example, demand generation. For demand generation, I mean planning. What is your forecasted demand for resources, and what's the level of detail? Is it 3 months horizon? Usually, we find in some cases the best quality, the quality that's reasonable in the forecasted demand is like 3 months horizon, because plans are not so detailed after 3 months. Few companies go 6 months and longer, but it's really, those are the good examples. And the level of precision of demand data, it is very, very very important. Are the plans based on predefined structural development processes? If so, have these processes been used over and over again? Is there knowledge, kind of a capitalization on planning? Is there feedback? Are there post-mortem assessments on plans? Does the organization really master the planning side, or are they always over or under? Next item, follow-up of actuals. That's basically today time tracking. as we hear it, the time tracking system is key. It is also a very important element for actuals, follow-up of actuals. So as you plan, you also want to see if the actuals correspond to the plan. If you want to do resource management, you need to really have the actuals. So it would be very important to qualify the different sites on where they are in time tracking. Next, the roll-up process, such criteria as the frequency. What is the frequency of the roll-up process? At what level is the data for the resources consolidated? For example, it could be at the local site for function, but is it at the local site for function and then it's aggregated globally for function? You know, how are the aggregates and who's using it? For who are they aggregated? And what is done? I mean, what is the end result of this aggregation process? What decisions are made? Who uses this information? And then obviously the decision-making process and when, at what level. Okay, next item, existing legacy systems at each site. That's obvious, you know, you look at that, but what's not obvious is, you know, it's easy to say, but what's not obvious is going out there and seeing for yourself. On a multi-site project, you need to almost be a Columbo, like a detective, and go and look at each different factor. If it's time tracking, you got to go look and see how the time tracking is being used in each site. If it's the planning and the resource planning, you got to go and see the plans and talk to project managers and look for yourself and get a real understanding of what are the main obstacles for the deployment. Obviously, obstacles would be new systems that have just been installed that have a high degree of customer satisfaction internally. People have spent a lot of time, a lot of sunk cost, but the actual tools are in place. So, which means that either you need to incorporate those actual systems, so that means you need to build interfaces with those systems. If on the other hand, if the local systems are not giving the satisfaction, obviously then for your project that might be considered as an opportunity because you would be relieving a pain point to actually harmonize across on those points. So that's very important. Key point on that is go and see for yourself, go on the shop floor and take a look. Last point, local site labor law is very important. In Europe, I don't think we have that much problem on that in the US and North and South America. In Northern Europe, we have a phenomenon which is the local labor laws, what they call the works councils. Very protective. They're extremely protective on what you're going to do with the information on resource demand and actuals, because obviously they're working for the better lifestyle quality of employees. They really take. They're very strong in some countries, like in Germany. Work councils can actually stop a project on its track if they feel that you cannot justify why you want to have the resource utilization information that you want and the transparency you want. Also, one point that's critical is it's actually a self-preservation mechanism, the local labor laws, because what they don't want you to do is they don't want to see how effective, they don't want to see benchmarks between their efficiency and efficiencies of other development sites, for example, in Eastern Europe or in Asia or in India, because obviously you would be conducting, if you have the information, you can very easily say, okay, wait, in terms of productivity, which site is more productive. What they want to do is they want to protect themselves as far as being benchmarked in terms of productivity against other sites. So that's also a very geopolitical issue, and it's something you need to consider. So that means that you need to have somebody that's very HR savvy in your team. Right. Let's go to the next slide. the third the third critical factor, which is organizational complexity. Basically, differences in business scope is really key driver of complexity. If you have different sites that have different business scopes and you're trying to do resource management across them, be very careful, because actually you might be going into a situation where one, the perception of the objectives could be different from each site on what they want to get out of the project. So each site could have its own local vision, because what they want to do with the resource, the global project, is what's advantageous to their business locally. What you need to look at the local needs, and you need to look at the business scope of each site, and then you need to step back and evaluate whether those local needs and the business scope are coherent with the global scope of the project. Yeah, and mixed model, very critical when you have sites that are working in a mixed model business environment, like they're doing some research work, development work. They're also lending resources for some service and maintenance support. Very complicated, because actually they have different clock speeds. These different businesses have different clock speeds, and the people who actually work in these different businesses, they have different intellectual and personal needs, human needs, and the clock speeds are therefore different. So you can have a highly reactive, action-oriented individual in maintenance, and you could have somebody who's very, very theoretical but conceptual, takes his time, likes to be very, very methodical on the other point spectrum, like research. And so you have completely different individuals, and you cannot be driving those different people at the same clock speed with the aggregation and the process, roll-up process. Is it just another development center with all functions? That's an easy one. We touched upon monofunction competence centers, business partners, suppliers. Do you need to also bring in some suppliers that are working in development, collaborative development? Very critical if you need to have a system that does also take into account contracting and suppliers. Production and industrialization, there's always a tug-of-war between production and industrialization. Usually production works on fulfilling product demand, and industrialization is basically the back end of development. So, but they share the same experts. So it's usually very critical lending one expert from production to industrialization. Just for this section, as an example, I like to give you an example of a case I had in Finland for resource management, where we had the management of wanted to drive a resource management process that federated a competency center and another site or two, which was development, doing product development. When we did an assessment of those two different organizations with different business time speeds and different clock speeds, we basically said, well, you will not be able to impose a common resource management process without breaking one process or the other. They had different ways of working, and it was a very complex change management project. And usually, if you have to impose one to do one way or another, you probably have a very slow change management project at your hand, because it's not easy adapting a new way of working. Next major topic is differences in resource management practices at each site. You have, which is linked to what I was saying just before, paragraph before, about the clock speed. You have, almost all organizations do annual planning. That's usually yearly planning. I hope there's not many companies that don't do annual planning. Then you have road mapping and strategy processes that usually are semesterly kind of roll-ups. Okay, then you have the next level, which is preparation for gate reviews or management reviews on an event base. Sometimes they're monthly. That's a very slightly higher aggregation clock speed. Then you have daily supply and demand balancing by resource managers. This could be, for example, an IT service center that wants to see across about 100 different IT projects. And the resource manager, more than likely, rightfully so, wants to see at least an aggregate on a weekly basis, not monthly. He's got a lot of different competencies in the IT organization. He's got a lot of small projects that could be week long to a month or 3 month long, and then a couple platform projects like an SAP implementation that could be years. So basically, he's got to really have a very fast clock speed on overview of the resources. And then you have a completely different area, which is competency acquisition and management, which could be a continuous for like a startup operation, a new branch, new greenfield application for a multinational where they need to ramp up on competencies in a new greenfield. So as you can see, there are different resource management practices, but what is really complicated is when you got to do all of that. Now imagine you have actually a multinational that's got multi-site, multi-business, and they say, by the way, I want all of that. I want annual planning, road mapping, preparation of gate reviews, daily supply-demand balancing for key functions that are being reactive, and competency acquisition. Now you got a pretty big project in your hand, and you got a lot of work because you need to harmonize all those across different sites with different backgrounds and different cultures. Right. So this gives you an overview of organizational complexity. Next, let's go to the fourth topic, which is cultural differences. Okay, so I'm okay on time almost. Cultural differences impacting planning and staffing. In a way, to be politically correct, we tend to joke about these cultural differences, but actually there are real differences. I think we all know. Here, this is kind of a caricature of the differences in Europe. No matter what you do, there will always be some cultural differences. Actually, that's what makes life interesting. Here, we in French, le paradis en France, en Europe, is paradise in Europe, is characterized or caricaturized by policemen would be English, car mechanic would be German, cook would be French, innkeeper would be Swiss, and a lover that would be Italian. And then the opposite side of the spectrum, l'enfer européen, or the hell in Europe, would be a policeman that would be German, a car mechanic that would be French, a cook that would be English, an innkeeper that would be Italian, and a lover that would be Swiss. So I think we can say a lot of things while we joke, so let's go on. So in a way, each way of working has its advantages. We know that different cultures and different countries have different ways of working. So this is not really a critique by any means. What is the real issue with these differences is when we have to work as a team with real deliverables and interdependencies across a multicultural team. That becomes an issue because then all of a sudden this team has to deliver, but yet they have differences in ways of working and all that, and understanding. Okay, so anyway, what we see is just the tip of the iceberg. We go to the next slide, and the differences we see some differences, cultural differences or differences in working, way of working that are originating based on the knowledge difference, understanding, and education. So we have different education systems. Some educations, not a critique, are more based on memory. Some systems are more based on understanding and more practical, hands-on. Some education systems are more conceptual. We can always explain some of the differences through some of it. We can explain through the differences in education systems. But in a way, globally, we tend to assume too much on what we don't know. So it's our team. We often expect a lot more, and we don't really know how much they don't know when we meet them. Some good companies, benchmark companies, have an extremely effective orientation program just to offset that. In other words, they have a very rigorous orientation program where they're putting through their new hired staff through some curriculum to give them an overview of the company culture, way of working, expectations, and also to be able to observe and see how the individual is really operates. I really recommend that. Next, the level of engagement is quite different in different cultures. In some cultures, for example, a simple yes does not mean the same thing in in one culture or another. For example, in Asia, a yes could mean a yes. I confirm that I'm hearing you. I confirm that I understand what you're saying, but it doesn't really mean confirm that they agree. It's more of a politeness of saying yes, they follow you or they're listening. It doesn't often mean that they understand. Whereas in some other countries, like Occidental countries, a yes means yes, I agree, I understand, and not only that I understand, but I agree. Because in Occidental countries, if they don't agree, they will usually either not say yes, or they will frown. They will probably express themselves with non-verbal communication, or they will express surprise, or they will even say, no, I don't agree, or are you sure about that? So they will challenge you. In Asian countries, challenging element doesn't exist always. It's more politeness factor. Next point, rapport with information. Very important. I have found that some cultures, it's completely innate to their culture to share information. But some other cultures, they just don't have this reflex of sharing. For example, Americans are known to over-communicate. They're actually taught to over-communicate. It's better to over-communicate than under-communicate. Some cultures, like the Germanic cultures, they tend to under-communicate. Next, level of consensus. We find that some countries, cultures have much more developed sense of consensus. For example, Sweden is very consensus-oriented. It takes a long time to get a decision from the resource managers in Sweden, but once they agree, it's quite we tend to see they're easier to build consensus. When the top guy talks, they listen and they say, yeah, everybody nods. But as soon as he turns around, everybody goes away. They tend to find reasons or exceptions, and the consensus is very quickly abolished. Usually, they're very well known in finding very quickly exceptions to the rule. There seems to be in Latin American cultures, there seems to be no issue in breaking consensus. as long as there is a good reason. Very interesting, isn't it? You could almost say it's intelligent, but then again, is it intelligent? It depends on the circumstances. So there are very much differences. Perception and management of risk. Beware of conflict between local and global interests. We talked about that briefly. Perception, sometimes looking from a global point of view, you don't have the same notion of risk as a local site. Local site will obviously look at its own best interest. So you have to understand what is their best interest and how they see it. We understand where they're coming from. What are their concerns for the local site? Is it job security, for example? Job security is one of the major issues with resource management. Does the resource manager really want to show all the projects he's working, all the different quality issues they're trying to patch up? It's really critical to be sensitive to just what don't they want to show with resource management. Operating mode and time horizon of management activity. We talked about the clock speed differences. It is rather difficult to change this clock speed. It's a long, sometimes you might even have better off changing resources because some resources just, they're there because they feel comfortable in that clock speed. If you're trying to change it, you're basically trying to push them out from their point of view. Next, we go to the last slide. Cultural differences. What you see is just the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, given the same task, different cultures will treat the planning and the risk management differently. Hence, the real workload and the staffing approach will be different. This is actually very profound. I think it's profound. Imagine that you've worked on developing a common process for 3 sites that do practically the same. And what you do is you give them the same work package, the same process, and you say, okay, plan this work package. And what you will find is that they will do the same work package with the same process. Their plans will be different. Why is that? Well, it's because they have different notion of risk. They have different background. They have different knowledge. They prioritize things differently. For example, given the same work package to a German, French, and an American development center or resource pool, the German approach will focus more on robustness and industrialization. Certainly if they're actually producing it in Germany, they will really have to, I think even if it's produced somewhere else, it's just the way the Germans are wired up. Their brains are, they are very robustness oriented, and that's their priority. So they will do the early evaluation, risk analysis of the design. They will do everything to make it robust. I would love to know if anybody disagrees with that, because my experience is in that, and I've had it confirmed by many people. The French and Italian approach will be more conceptual, but also that's explained by their education system. The French engineers and the French education system is a highly conceptual system, probably one of the most sophisticated and conceptual systems there is. They're just wired that way to be more architecture oriented. They like to have a complex architecture, but yet they are less oriented into industrialization. So the best would be to combine the French and the German teams to have robustness and superior architecture. The American approach is kind of in between. They're more pragmatic, and the American approach is more business oriented, more focused on priorities, and making sure that the development conforms to the most critical requirements, and they will leave out the non-critical items. So as you can see, these are completely different ways of doing things, and it's completely linked to the culture. Just one last point before we finish. Basically, I like to say that one of the key differences, one of the key points highlighted to this presentation, or the key point is that when you're actually looking at multicultural teams, having a lot of project management experience myself, I like to say that one of the key lessons we take from this presentation is that an international project, a multi-site project, needs to have its own culture. So what's really critical for the project is to have good leadership, and the leadership should be able to, and communication, to build a project culture that is dominating all the local differences. I think that's really the biggest challenge for good project management, is to show and communicate the expectations of the program or the project, and to build and indoctrinate people with different backgrounds so that they all work to the same rule, to the same expectations. So this is where the leadership becomes a pivotal factor for success. Having said that, I'll stop there, James. We have 10 minutes.
Sure, Bob. Well, let's spend some time with questions and answers. I know that many of you have been intrigued, as I have, listening to Bob's presentation. And so I would encourage you to go to the Questions tab, if you've not done so already, and submit your question for Bob. And let's see how many of those we can get to before our time runs out today. Well, Bob, our first question comes in from Russell. Russell asked the question. He says, we've had this question before, Bob. He says, how do you deal with the difficulty of scheduling meetings when you have group members who are spread across multiple time zones? Do you have a best practices for handling those situations?
Yeah, good question. It seems like this question comes up often. So obviously it's preoccupying most people. Scheduling meetings, the problem is that nobody has yet identified a way to get around time differences across the world. And no matter what we do, we have to face that doing multi-site, multinational meetings, video or mixed voice and video conferences requires some level of sacrifice across different teams. The main point is to be fair and to share the burden. In other words, to have a rotation system that's taxing different members. So if you have management on one side, it should not always be to the management's favor. They should also show courtesy that they're committed and that they're also taking the hit, and it's important. The project is important for them, so it's got to rotate. Second thing is scheduling meetings. Could be meetings themselves could be multimedia, multi-form. You could also alleviate the need for meetings by sharing information. For example, one multinational project I was on did a great job because they had a really IT savvy guy on the team with good link with IT department. They had pop-up menus, pop-up news on the project's different sites distributed to the team members. So they had information popping up. They were able to really share information on real-time successes and accomplishments of the team were shared. Latest documents, updates were notified. So they were doing an excellent job in communicating. So actually the team meetings were not really forums for communication as much as they were for decision making. So that's actually the third point is besides communicating, you need to also have a very good disciplined way of having team meetings where you have done, everybody expected to do the prerequisite homework, the work needed to prepare, bring the data, and send it before the meeting, and to really focus the meeting on decision making. If these meetings are effective meetings and you have high performing teams, then I don't think the time differences becomes an issue, and you're rotating them. Actually, it becomes a way of creating a solidarity between team members. So you need to create this dynamic, I guess. accomplishments, communication, rotation of the meeting time differences, and having very high-performing team meetings with decisions and actions that are followed up. So no mystery. This is all the basics of good project management.
You know, as an add-on to that, Bob, we've had several folks mention that they've found successes and failures with various forms of communication. You know, you've got email, you've got a teleconference, you've got video chats. Is there a way that you can mix specific types of communication into those project meetings to make them more effective?
I don't know. No. I find, for example, video quite effective. I have obviously, if you have one mix I have seen is to be able to have live voice, video, and also having data. In other words, putting a document on the screen. So you can have document reviews. So what you need is you need to have multi-screens. You need to have one or two screens on one topic, but also have a video and voice. It's quite effective. If video doesn't work in some areas because the bandwidth doesn't work, you need to at least have voice and document. So everybody's on the same piece of paper. They're looking at the same document. They're reviewing. Sometimes you need to review things, action tables, risk tables, resource balancing. You need to also have a system that shows. So integrated systems tend to be able to do all that. So that's the best I know. Unless, James, you want to add something.
Well, we know that you use Skype because I saw your message pop up there. Skype is certainly a good alternative. It's an inexpensive and becoming more and more. I know that when Skype started out, they had very limited bandwidth, and you had, you got what you paid for. But now I know that Skype is actually a very good network, and it's free. Yeah, it's certainly the right price.
Yeah, a friend of mine just the pop-up we have. It's an international project. We're basically doing Skype. It's better than having to take a flight and go spend a fortune to have a face-to-face meeting when you can. If you have the intimacy and the experience to work with somebody, Skype doesn't, or video conferencing does not replace personal contact. But once you have this contact and you know the person, you have built a rapport. I think the tools like Skype, obviously Skype is free, which I recommend highly. It's a very good tool. You can do it from a restaurant as long as you have network connection. It's mobile. You don't have to be in your office.
Absolutely.
It's quite useful.
We have another question coming in. We've got a couple more minutes left, and so I'll remind our audience, if you've not already submitted your question, please go ahead and do so. And should we run out of time, what I'll do is I'll leave the session open for a few extra minutes so that we can get your electronic responses, and we'll send you a response electronically. Bob, this one comes from Marie. She says, what's the best way to handle the assignment of tasks to specific resources when you don't have a resource manager? So for instance, some may be working in one department, some under another department, some under a resource manager. Is there a way to be able to work with resources that aren't specifically reporting to you?
Well, it depends on it's interesting. If you don't have a resource manager, that means that in a way you are a highly project. You're a very project-oriented organization. So if it's a highly project-oriented organization and you have resources that need to be assigned, then you need to have an arbitrage between different projects. So usually somebody like in the PMO, project management office, can do it. You need to know the priorities of the tasks. So if a resource has been allocated to a program and the program manager says, okay, I can, and usually it's the case with strong program managers, they can actually say, well, I have so-and-so, I have James, or I have Conway as a developer. I choose to put him on project X and not project Y because project X is on the critical path. So it could be a program manager that assigns the resources if it's been dedicated, if it's in his resource pool. It could be a PMO if it's a cross-project resource. I hope I've answered the question.
Well, I think what Marie was alluding to is sometimes the difficulty of assigning, tracking these resources when they don't specifically work for you, because they're working on other people's projects at the same time, and so it requires a bit of good management since you don't have a direct reporting relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's see if we can squeeze in one more quick question, Bob. You mentioned the need for tracking of actuals, tracking assignments and resources. One of our attendees today says that they use Excel, but they're having some difficulties tracking these resources because of the static aspect of Excel versus the dynamics of a project plan. Do you have some tools or some things that you utilize or have utilized in other projects that help you to be able to track resources and apply them to specific tasks?
Well, I have had experiences with different different systems, some pretty big systems, and I know the advantage of having an integrated system. My point of view is that you need to go with the simplest system available. For a long time, I have been a fan of Excel because Excel seems to be the easiest system. So I always tend to go to the easiest, more user-friendly system there is. To be honest with you, I have seen that some of the big systems out there are actually themselves obstacles for implementing resource management because they're just so heavy and so difficult and time-consuming for resource managers to use. So I tend to always go to the most simpler and user-friendly system. And this is what has actually attracted me to Journyx. So I think if I'm here as a partner presenting what I can do, it's not because with Journyx, it's not by accident. I think Journyx does have one of the simplest and more user-friendly systems there is. That goes above what Excel obviously can do, or a parameterized Excel can do. I have actually tried modifying Excel and using a smart Excel with some programming and basic programming and all that. But it seems like there are some easy-to-use systems, but you cannot do everything with them. So I think for resource management, Journyx is the way to go.
Well, thanks for that plug, Bob. I tend to agree with you. I think a lot of folks get caught up in the nitty-gritty details instead of trying to solve the problem. I heard a guy once say, they were talking about time tracking, which you alluded to as the importance of tracking actuals, and he made the statement, he says, if it takes longer for your people to explain to you why they don't like tracking time than it would for them to actually track their time in something very simple, then you seem to be on the right step of having something very simple, painless, something that's not an intrusion on their day, to help them to be able to track time. And if you can get them to track time, then as a resource manager or as a project manager, then you have the ability to be able to see actuals and be able to make proper assumptions on when projects are going to be completed, who's available, when they're going to be doing things. So thanks, Bob. That's very helpful.
Well, I mean it because I find that the very heavy systems are actually truly obstacles for implementation. Because people just don't want to change and spend half their time fighting with the system in a way.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, so solve a problem. Well, we've come to the end of our time. We promised to keep you right at an hour, and we're right there. So my apologies. We're going to have to close the session down, but I would like to say a great big thank you to Bob for taking time out of his day today to share with us his expertise in managing resources across cultures and borders. It's been helpful. As I mentioned, if you we'll be sending out a follow-up email which will have your PDU certificate. And also I'd like to mention that we have a webinar series that's going on right now, which this webinar today is a part of. Bob has presented. We have several other webinars that are going on this semester about some are on defining and implementing simple project processes. Others are, I've got one here called Jumpstart Your Way to Efficiency, Scope and Requirements Management. Change is coming, what project managers should know, and how to prepare your organization for change. Also got a new one coming up on the new SAS 70 implementation changes. So I would encourage you to visit our website. They're shown on the screen. Upper left-hand corner it shows register for webinar. And you can register for any of those webinars. We offer free PDUs for the live attendees. We also have an extensive library over the last year of fantastic speakers who have been presenting in our webinar series on different topics surrounding managing people, managing time, managing resources. We want to help you to be able to do your projects successfully, on time, on budget, within scope. And so you might ask, what does Journyx do? And Bob alluded to it. We've been in the time tracking and people tracking business for the last 15 years. We've got a timesheet product that really has no equal. It solves the biggest, nastiest time data problems. And then on top of that, we built a project management tool called Project Execute, which really focuses on answering some simple questions like who's working on what, when will they be finished, and who's available for the next project. So if any of those issues are something that you're dealing with in your organization, feel free to visit our website. We have some live demos every Wednesday and also some videos and some testimonials from some of our thousands of customers about how we can help them to solve those problems. We'd be happy to be of assistance to you as well. So we want to thank you for your time today. We appreciate you spending your time with us, and we hope that all your projects moving forward are successful. Have a wonderful day today. Thank you.